Welcome to the Layer of Secrets podcast. Tonight we're talking about cyberpunk and security. While cyberpunk missions can take on a lot of different flavors, the go-to is the infiltration job, and that means getting past security. I'm David Moore, and I have nearly finished a gaming coffee table.
I'm Ken Newquist, and I finally ran my Elysium HQ adventure for Cyberpunk Red. Well, at least half of it. You guys still have to get out. And we are joined tonight by Overlord Emeritus Chris Miller, who has brought some great ideas regarding security. So we're really, really glad that we invited him, because he pointed out like the gaping hole in what we should talk about. So we should probably just get to it, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a gaping hole. It was, I was going through the notes. I guess to jump into this, the thing that I was bringing to the table tonight was mostly about planning the heist and planning the network and planning the security. This is because I'm a big old nerd. I have an interest in cybersecurity. I've done classes and training and pen testing and things like that. So when I come into Cyberpunk, it's a real playground. Cyberpunk Red has some really great tables and tools in the Netrunning section about planning network architectures. But really, when you're getting into it, you're kind of looking at like two main choices for it. You can either scale the network difficulty for your players, kind of like making sure you've got a good story, making it just difficult enough, or you don't do that. And like, if someone's going to break into Arasaka HQ, it's going to be a lot harder than what you see in Cyberpunk 2077, because that's ridiculous. There's no way Silverhand should have made it even through the door, right? So, right. I mean, so you could scale it up and have your players either fail grandly or have them get lucky and have them really challenged. I tend to go with the challenged thing, and then in the middle of I will plan for it to be difficult, and if they're having a hard time, maybe I'll pull a couple of punches here and there. But the interesting thing about the net running in Cyberpunk is really you're going to have one player doing it, so you've got to be maybe one, maybe two, maybe. If you're doing net running, the idea of having a tech and a net runner, like one doing physical security, one dealing with network security, that's a potent possibility. Layers of security will make for a better game for sure. And definitely. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. So looking at the network architecture difficulty section on page 210 is an absolute must. They do some really nice things in there about explaining how hard a thing should be, and it gives you kind of random tables to lay out demons and the various bots and things like that you'll find in a network. But a network is basically just a dungeon, right? It's a dungeon populated with monsters that someone's going to go through. The stats are a little different, but if you can visualize it and map it, people are going to have a good time because they're used to that. It's not all visual. So the other piece I'd bring to the table on this is where to look for inspiration.
Yes,
for your network architecture and stuff. Right. So the examples in the core guide are really good. Yeah, that's great. But honestly, real world threat intelligence guides are fantastic. I've got one at home here that I use. It's called Visual Threat Intelligence. And it's a picture book of various threat models, threat analysis tools, ways to chronicle cyber attacks. I mean, it is exactly what it says. It's visual, but it can show you things like a sunburst attack, where it'll say, well, there's a Trojan in the middle, and you do these other things, and you could use this to kind of guide your players or build your architecture to leave them holes to do things. They don't have to know this stuff. If you've got a player who does know it, well, you're probably in for a little bit of a problem, because they're going to want to start. I'm like the worst player for this, because like I know just enough to be dangerous about real world stuff, let alone net running in Cyberpunk Red. That book is really great. I'm sure we can probably put a link in the show notes to that. Looking at movies, Johnny Mnemonic is cheesy, but it's fun, and it's got some good examples.
So much fun.
The scene in the Matrix Revolutions where Trinity is breaking into the power power center.
Yes.
She uses Nmap. I mean, she's doing hacky. So some of that is fun. Don't look at Swordfish. Swordfish is terrible, and it's the worst hacking scene in the world. But using a combination of tech and heist from movies is a really good move.
I got to ask about the most obvious one that you didn't mention.
Yeah,
Hackers.
Hackers. Hackers is, what's neat about Hackers is how visual and nonsensical it is.
Yes.
It's very artistic and inspiring, but it's also true that real hacking looks absolutely nothing like that. The people, I've had the good fortune to meet some very talented white hat hackers. A real hack takes months. It's not sitting down at a keyboard and doing a thing. But we're in fiction world here in Cyberpunk Red.
Right.
So now
Hackers is much more like Cyberpunk Red hacking.
It is.
Visually.
It is. Well, and here's the thing, is like the thing to know about hacking, like good hacking is a heist. It's more like the Italian Job or Ocean's 11 than it in, the whole movie is the setup of how they're going to do it. The actual doing it, that's what you see in Hackers. You don't see the setup.
Right.
So, I mean, giving your people, don't throw your people right into the network architecture. They have to be able to plan a heist. These things are heists.
There's little pieces of the heist portion in Hackers, like going in, delivering the flowers, but memorizing everybody's passwords as they're going in, and doing there was a couple of other scenes along those lines of planning, but we don't know how long that took.
Well, and here's the thing, is that Hackers based a lot of that on stuff from 2600 magazine and real hacker culture, so the verisimilitude is there. And that was the next thing I was going to bring up. Go check out cybersecurity podcasts like Hacking Humans from the Cyberwire, or listen to some cybersecurity news podcasts that talk about Darknet Diaries is also fantastic for this. Darknet Diaries goes through famous hacks. There's like 150 episodes, but it talks about the social engineering, and it talks about, like I say, it's the stuff that dream games are made of, and that's what you're trying to run. And then the last thing is, books. There are so many books, but looking into I can't remember the guy's real name, but he goes by Space Rogue. He's a member of Loft Heavy Industries, and he wrote a book recently about these were the guys that testified before Congress about how insecure American networks were. It's a great read. I'll get you guys a link for the show notes,
Cool.
Or any of Kevin Mitnick's books. Mitnick was, for those who don't know, Kevin Mitnick was the most wanted hacker in America at one point. His story is really fascinating. What he did was really interesting, and the man had some pretty serious problems too that led him there. But those books talk an awful lot about the psychology of social engineering and things like that. So, like I say, all of this is the stuff that Cyberpunk is made of. It's not, you've got your mains and your silver hands that are going to just blast their way through, but it's really the subtle art of the con that these things are really about.
That's where your media gets you in the front door or other things along those lines.
Right.
The one thing I am seeing from all of this that is common in all role-playing games, at least that I have run and other people that I know have run, which is take inspiration from the real world, liberally steal it, and then repurpose it for your game.
Well, and because the reality is, there is crazier stuff going on in the real world in cybersecurity right now than you're going to think of in your game. I guarantee it. Just do a little bit of research about the cyber war that's taking place because of the Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russia war.
Yeah.
The CrowdStrike put out a great paper about the number of hacker groups that have been involved around the world on both sides. It is It is staggering. I mean, we are living in a cyberpunk world. It's just that our conventional
It doesn't
news
look
media,
as cool as the book.
I just said conventional news media. Now I'm a wacko, and I need to go and put on go weave some tinfoil into hats.
I will say too, like you can take inspiration in other ways. I mean, it wasn't a hack, but the CrowdStrike outage itself, like the consequences of unleashing hell on Earth.
Well, yeah,
right? And it's not the first. It's not the first time that a bad configuration has taken down major portions of the internet or systems.
Well, and that's an interesting thing. So, it's not the systems themselves don't get weak. It's the humans that are the problem. And that's the thing. When you're planning these things, take that into account. You may not be, your players. I said make it hard, but maybe one of the network engineers in your little fantasy world had a bad day and left a back door open. Maybe that's the thing they've got to find. Make it hard enough for them to find it, but when they find it, maybe it's a path straight to the middle.
Yeah, I think Cyberpunk Red in and of itself is probably actually better set up to defend itself against a widespread outage because they already got nuked in cyberspace, basically, right? Because now everything's much more compartmentalized. But the thing I was thinking with the CrowdStrike one is you're having your edge runners be in a position to take advantage of a timely outage, right? Like, you're just looking for opportunities. Suddenly someone's like, hey, this is down. This is the consequences of this. We have an opportunity to go in and do a thing.
I mean, I'm here to tell you that the big secret about software is that it is all spit, duct tape, caffeine, and Twinkies. And I mean, it is one Rube Goldberg machine built on top of another. And they have weaknesses. I mean, it's fascinating. If you read any of the protocols that make up the internet, I mean, it's crazy that any of this stuff actually works. But layered together, all of that. I know a great joke about UDP, but you probably wouldn't get it and you wouldn't care anyway. So
for another time. So there are some other things we wanted to talk about in terms of how to execute your security and heist, and specifically kind of getting into the game itself, both Cyberpunk Red. Really, this I think applies to any sort of game where you're doing a heist-like thing like Blades in the Dark or Scum Villainy, which we played previously. Really, or even just Dungeons and Dragons, where there's going to be a situation where you're gonna need to get in and out, and you want to think about like, well, how can I make this interesting for my players, right? So, I'll kick us off with role preservation. I think this has been a big thing for me for our Cyberpunk campaign. It's also role awareness, I guess, right? Like, I know we have a net runner, so I want there to be net running opportunities. Right, but I also know that we have a net runner, and I don't want to have everybody else be sidelined while the net runner is doing their things, which has been a challenge with cyberpunkish games in the past, right? But also, like, what skills do the players have that they really are excited to be using, right? So it's Atlas, right? Shake and Bake in our campaign. He's the solo, like he's the guy who can take the shot from half a mile away, giving him opportunities to do that. Like he's Overwatch for the heist or whatever, right? Giving him opportunities to do things is good, but if you're looking at like what the inverse of that is, what skills are the crew missing, right? So if you don't have a med tech or a net runner, you're not going to have a lot of like electronics bypassing skills, right? You're not going to be able to do it that way. So you're going to need to lean into the social engineering piece, like relying on your media or your corporate guy, or your corporate exec. Is that what the role is?
Yeah.
But anyway,
I think so.
You're leaning into or law enforcement, right? Like you're working on your social connections, you're working on your network rather than hacking the actual network, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's been great in the game for each of us to be able to play our part,
Yep.
Even when the car blows up.
Well, it would be, I mean, so much of the cyberpunk genre is based around the netrunner, the hacker, right?
Yes.
But the Cyberpunk Red game gives you so much more to do. And that's really good. I focus on the net running because it's the same reason I like wizards in D&D, right? I mean, it's just kind of where my head goes. But that's just that's just the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah. Shadowrun is pretty good at that, or was. I played many editions ago, not the current one. But like the biggest problem always was when the when someone went in to the network, everybody else went and got coffee. 'Cause but it was fun to do all of that stuff. And if you weren't hacking in, you had to find another way around it.
Right.
Cyberpunk Red, they do net running a little bit better, in that the net run is happening while other stuff is happening. It happens more in real time, not like time slows down and all of a sudden the net runner can use 100% of their brain and
Right.
they can think in milliseconds, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not like that. So
The only other system I've seen that's doing net running better, I think, than Cyberpunk Red is Cities Without Number.
cool.
I've been running that for another group, and it's simplified, but that makes it a little bit more. People don't have to go for a coffee.
Right.
Really, is what it comes down to.
And there's a certain amount of detail that you want as flavor, but if you make it too detailed from a clicky-clacky dice perspective, then the whole game tends to bog down.
Yeah. So I think this isn't to say that you shouldn't still have, like, a corporation just isn't going to have security because your players don't have the skill to bypass it. I think the obstacles should still be there, but you want to, I think, encourage creative thinking in those scenarios. If the players are still going for that sort of a run, right? Like, it might just be that sort of group lends itself to more of the social engineering type missions that aren't about trying to bypass hard security, right? But we give them opportunities, right? Like, so they are now confronted with a pretty significant security challenge in terms of, like, the physical security and the network security. How else can they get past that door, right? Are they able to trick the guard into coming out? Are they able to get themselves hired and, like, be guards on the inside or be maintenance staff? Like, there's lots of opportunities for them to get into that particular situation or get to the target without actually just having to hack it, or without having to, like, bypass the security, including shooting stuff.
Or like there's a couple of missions in Cyberpunk 2077 where you don't go in the front door, you go into the building next door, cross over, jump over a few things, and then go in a side window, and then you're basically in the middle of the place that you need to be.
Right. I mean, Fast and the Furious is notorious for this. I mean, all of their skill set is mechanical and cars. So all of their solutions are mechanical and cars, with the occasional
but
supercomputer.
they have two hackers.
I was going to say they
have a tech
ones.
and they have a hacker. Yeah, they have a tech. I mean, they have a tech. They have a hacker. I mean, and that's kind of looking at Fast and Furious, the latter movies, as a cyberpunk campaign is kind of an interesting lens.
It is, because you have, like, the God's Eye thing, right?
Yeah, the last piece of a Fast and Furious movie that I saw, probably at a hotel, but it was very cyberpunk, where they were stealing this car, and then they jumped the car from, like, the 50th or higher floor into another tower.
Yeah. It's a good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they actually do have the mix, though. They do have hackers. I mean, I guess I'm downplaying the other parts. So they do the social bit. It just almost always ends up in some sort of a car chase, because that's where their characters are leaning into, right? And that's what the people are coming to see, right? Like, they're not actually looking to watch people hack the entirety of the movie. So I think the other thing, I'm just going to, like, keep setting up our little topics here that we can, like, kind of round robin when we get into situations, but, like, consequences. So we talked about this with some of our Scum Villainy stuff. It's kind of like you succeed but, or you succeed and, right? So if you're going to go in loud, noise attracts guards. And if you're going to go in slow, the more time it takes you to meticulously disassemble the box in front of you, the greater chance the guards are going to show up, right? And if you just decide to, like, throw some C4 at the problem, it may just destroy the thing that you came to snag. So I think thinking through how there can be consequences for what the players are doing, no matter what strategy they choose to approach, is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, every alert increases difficulty.
Right.
It just,
There were two things. I was listening to a podcast earlier, the Atlas Loom. They were a short run podcast, but they stole the effectively it was the Cyberpunk 2077 or what was it? I've never played the game. San Andreas.
Oh,
Oh.
GTA.
Yeah, where if the cops start coming after you, it starts with 1 star, then it goes to 2 stars, then it goes to 3 stars. So like they were running when the guards found you like that. But before the guards found you, I would liberally steal clocks from Blades in the Dark and Scum and Villainy and use the clock to tick down to when the guards find you.
Yep. Yeah, I think, and that's, again, if you were doing the network security thing, every time you trip, something's going to happen. It's going to, something's going to take note of your error.
Right. And I think that just like being on Reddit and a couple of other places where people are looking for cyberpunk advice, especially I think people perhaps who haven't been around as long as us, like, oh my God, my players are overpowered. They can do anything they want. I've given them all these cool toys. How do I deal with that? I'm like, there's always a bigger fish, right? And I think you see that in both Grand Theft Auto and in Cyberpunk 2077. Like, you set off enough alarms, there's going to be a substantial response. And they're going to have bigger guns than you.
Yep. I will say, with the noise attract the guards and other things like that, and I think we're getting into it in this next section, but yes, there will be cameras at these places, but almost always cameras are not really manned in most places. They're there for afterward. So if you want to stay secret, you're going to need to wipe the cameras, but you don't necessarily have to avoid the cameras while you're there.
Right.
Do your research. Make sure that they're not manned, but that's another thing that there's a hole that can be gotten through that you don't have to necessarily plan around. You have to plan for the contingency.
It's not always the laser grid.
Right.
Which actually is the next thing we're going to talk about. Not all security is a lockdown barrier, right? So it's not always that you're trying to get the MacGuffin out of the research facility. It could be actually there was a brainstorming session at this one corporate headquarters. You need to get in and get pictures of the whiteboards, right? There could be a data drive that's being hidden in a crystal necklace at a party, right? And so you need to get that necklace, but like all the hacking in the world isn't necessarily going to help you. You need to get them to like show up and look good in a 3-piece suit kind of thing. And then I think this was you, David. It could be a person or an animal. Remember Ian the corgi?
That's
or
me.
Was this you?
Ein.
The corgi.
That's me.
I don't
I'm
think
the
Cowboy
corgi.
Bebop, so...
Yep. Yeah,
You need to watch
no,
Cowboy
I mean,
Bebop.
so, all of the things that you were talking about, Ken, your stuff felt a little bit more Bond to me, the crystal necklace and all that. But a lot of corporations are just mundane. Someone might just be hiding a USB drive in a flower pot in the corner,
Right.
or
Yep.
but or on their dog's collar, or in the case of Ein was a very specially developed corgi, that was genetically manipulated. So there's a whole thing going on there. I'm still working my way through it. So I'm not entirely certain what the punchline is there, but I know the corgi is special. So the thing that brought that to mind to me was, weirdly enough, the movie Man of Steel, where they talk about putting the codex, the genetic information, into Clark or into Kal-El. You can store data on organic material. Maybe the plant in the office is the data storage.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or think about Iron Man 3 with the extremis stuff in the plants, or that kind of thing.
All you have to do is take this thing for the World's Fair, and then it will turn into the solution to your problem.
Well,
Just need a
this also
montage.
gave me an idea.
Yeah.
This also gave me an idea for it. What if you don't have a netrunner, but they want to get into the network? Your group could have found out that some person inside stores their password on a sticky note under the desk, and they have to get in, find the sticky note, read the password, and give it to the offsite hacker that is running a separate thing.
Right. Or you hire the offsite hacker to develop the spike that the technical spike that you insert into the USB port that
Right.
you hand wave it, mean, this is Star Wars all over the place, right? Like, you've got these data spikes that you just go around. Need to hack a system? Use a data spike. That's what you did all throughout Knights of the Old Republic, right? So
Yeah.
there's ways to handle it. I mean, it's where you want the challenge to actually be for the players, I think, right?
Yep.
Making them frustrated isn't fun.
Physical security, network security, social, the whole thing. It's all, you've got a lot of things to play with here.
Yeah, so we did talk a little bit about this before because David loves his clocks. But time pressure.
I do.
Right? Given enough time, I think gamers will always spend the maximum amount of time planning. And that was one of the beautiful things about Blades in the Dark and Scum Villainy is you didn't have to do that because you could just, retroactively figure out how you knew the answer. But I think having that pressure that you, like, getting in and getting out and just, like, doing nothing is not an option. Or spending all day coming with the perfect plan, also not an option. I think helps move the game along and also gives you a little bit of that, the heist movie feel. Like, no one's ever like, and then we spent a month on the beach.
Right.
I am tempted in terms of time pressure to give real world time pressure. Now that I've been reading Shadow Dark,
I
kind of want to go, okay, you can take as long as you want to plan, but I've got a series of things that are happening at the location that after 15 minutes, something happens. After 30 minutes, something else happens. After an hour, something else happens. And it's just going to get harder for you.
That is what they do in Rime of the Frost Maiden. With there is a dragon that is going through the 10 towns. It is a clock. And it spends so much time here, and then it takes so much time to get to this next place. And it just kind of unfolds, and the party has to figure out where they're going to confront this thing and how they're going to do it.
Yeah, and then so naturally, there's also the question of, well, what happens if they don't? What happens if they just get lost? What happens if they fail their roles? What happens if the gig just doesn't work? And so I think being able to think through that can also be fun. Like, failure can be fun.
I mean, we nearly, up until just about the very end, we were a hair's breadth of just, I don't care about the money, we're bailing out of Elysium HQ. And we don't have that option anymore. But, it's what would happen in game had we bailed. It's that is also an interesting story. So I would say if your players do that, roll with it.
I love the thing in Starforged and Ironforged, the idea of the weak hit.
Right.
Yes, but.
Yes.
Yes, you succeed, but this complication happens. I think that's a really powerful storytelling technique and allows for a lot of improvisation in the midst of a high-pressure situation.
Yeah.
Yes, you're climbing the gutter, but the nails begin to pull out of the wall. What do you do?
Yeah, and I'd actually, I could actually see in Cyberpunk Red, it's like, yeah, maybe you failed your role to hack in, or maybe you failed your role to shoot somebody, or you failed your stealth role. Maybe you actually succeed at the action, but there is a consequence for it.
Yeah. Well, that's very Cyberpunk, right?
Yes.
The operation was a success, but the patient died. I mean, it's,
right.
Everybody succeeds, but everybody fails.
So I think one of David's runs where he kind of goes cyber psycho in the middle and basically murders that woman, in the middle of it. That was a successful run, right?
Right.
Maybe.
So I do want to say, so there is the other option where you just let them in. And so when I was doing the Elysium HQ setup, that was kind of where I wanted to go. Like, I teased that I was watching a lot of Resident Evil, but and actually the thing about Resident Evil that I kind of stole from that is the consequences of the original Resident Evil movie only catch up with them once they get to the core and they start like disabling all of the fail safes. Right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to play up like all of the other edge running teams that had come before you, right? And the various ways that they had failed as clues, because you haven't failed yet, and actually it seems to be going pretty easy, right? And so then you get to the bottom.
Up until the end of that.
Until you get to the end and you flip the switch and suddenly like, oh wait, there are now consequences for flipping the switch. So it could be that you just lure the edge runners in, or you lure the adventurers in, because that's the point.
And the side benefit, by the way, is like, Ken, you were letting us know out of character that you were watching Resident Evil.
Yes.
And while we wanted to play earlier, there was a big run up to these next few sessions. And knowing that you were planning this, knowing that you were watching Resident Evil, like, we came in with a certain, like, oh crap sort of vibe of like, you know, they're in the walls, you know, they're coming for us, you know, game over, man, game over.
Right.
Like, when we started playing, we were in that mindset already. And then it just got worse and worse as nothing happened. And we got deeper and deeper. And it's like, oh, now we're starting to find bodies, but nothing that shot those people. Okay, deeper and deeper and deeper. And then at the end, of course, we flip the switch and we still have to find out what happens next. But there was a whole huge thing where we were investigating and just the horror kept ramping up. And it was, if we could have just walked in, it could have taken 5 minutes of game time.
Right.
But it took the entire session because we were so freaking paranoid.
But in a good way.
In a good way. It was a fun game.
So talking about some situations, one of the situations we talked about was like, just to, you know, kind of like war game this a little bit. So first situation, you've got break into a secure vault in a biolab, retrieve a sample. You have 24 hours to do it. So this is basically like hard target infiltration, right? And so some of the things we talked about and how to do it, like you could hack your way in past the physical security. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about that. You could just blast your way in, right? Just we are loaded up. You've seen that scene. You're just going to go and like kneel your way through the corporate headquarters to rescue the person, or talk your way in. But it can be really hard. And some of the examples I was looking at was obviously Resident Evil. The Die Hard, I think, actually is great if you envision your edge runners as the crew that is trying to break into
Hans Gruber's crew.
Hans Gruber's crew. Yep. They do it all, right? Like,
yeah,
and they take advantage of everything. There's some social engineering at the beginning. There's this whole like, this is what you think they're going for, but it's not actually. There's like having to get the names from, like trying to extract information from the CEO. That doesn't go well. Then they need to like physically bypass the security with a drill. And then like the last thing is they actually have to like take out power to the building. But that's okay because the FBI is going to follow their playbook and they're going to cut the power for you, right? So it's...
Right.
And
I do have a fourth one.
Go ahead.
For that one. That we didn't write down, but it's a secure vault. So hearkening back to our earlier example, if you've got a lot of nomads, you hook up chains to the vault, to some cars, you can just drive away with the vault and figure out how to open it later.
That's but that's been a joke in a number of D&D campaigns. You know, don't try to break into the chest, steal the chest. You know, that kind of thing. One thing I will say for each of these scenarios that I've seen that you could, if you want to be creative, you can reverse it. Maybe instead of stealing something from a biolab, they're placing something.
Yes.
Or they're violating something, or you know, the same
Switch
thing with
something out
with the data. You know, there is money to be made in placing compromising information on a politician's computer.
Yes.
You know, that kind of thing. So any of these steal, break into has a reverse that can also be very exciting, and it also, your players may not expect that kind of it's a heist. It's just a different kind of heist.
Right. I like that idea of like having to sneak into the biolab to contaminate the samples or introduce samples that make them think that their great success was not actually a success because your rival company is trying to bring their product to bear, right?
Sabotage, yeah.
Sabotage. So our next scenario was steal data from a secure terminal in a Zetatech subsidiary. It must be completed in 1 week's time. This is more of a soft target infiltration. If you're thinking about it like a subsidiary, it's a corporate office of some sort. It's open to the public. It's probably easily infiltrated.
You know, I just realized as you're reading through this, I thought of two of the perfect team situations that are great to model your cyberpunk stuff on: the A Team and Leverage.
Yes.
Yep. Leverage is a great series to watch, to be able to like create any of these, because they have so many different heists, and the showrunner for Leverage like studied all this extensively. Like can't remember his name
Devlin?
offhand.
Was that Dean Devlin?
No, it wasn't Dean Devlin. It was John Rogers.
John Rogers. Sorry.
And he often talks with Rob Donahue back in the Twitter days, exchanging heist stuff, which was really entertaining and informative to watch and listen to.
So it's an older movie, and a lot of people may not actually even know about it. But Sneakers is a great, like, low.
What a cast!
It's a great. It's Robert Redford. It's Dan Aykroyd. There's a whole bunch of other people whose names are probably escaping me right now. It's fantastic, fantastic cast. They have to get the MacGuffin, right? It's the thing that I think can break any password. But they do all of the soft skills to get in, right? This isn't.
It's definitely not a Fast and the Furious. It's like the other end of that spectrum. It is a heist movie, but it's the other end of the spectrum. They try not to break anything. They try not to be seen.
Sneakers was more what like hacking was in the day than hackers.
Yeah.
Right. So some ways we talked about when we were brainstorming for Get In There. One, forge identities to infiltrate the building. You know, this is like you steal the ID card off the guy while he's getting coffee. Hack the computer to add your own record. Right, not because you're trying to get the data off of it, because you're just trying to insert yourself into the system. We mentioned before, go legit, get yourself hired. Right, like if you have a week, you might have some time. Depending on the scenario you're playing, you could have a couple different ways.
This just happened, real world. Did you hear about that KnowBe4, the company that does all your phishing tests and all of that for corporations?
No.
Hired a North Korean hacker
No,
accidentally. Oh yeah, this is a real thing that happened.
The real thing. Yeah. They were undercover and ended up hiring the North Korean hacker.
That's amazing. And so, of course, you could just blast your way through the building as well. But the other thing we talked about was Cyberpunk 2077 is a good example of this. The scenario for V and Jackie as they're breaking into Arasaka Tower. Like they go out, they acquire the drone that they can use to drive through the ventilation shaft to get to the appropriate place. I mean, it all goes horribly for them, but
spoilers.
Well, that's
a strategy.
But again, it was a smooth entry, and they got to the core, and then everything went wrong.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That's the important thing, though, is that you can have the perfect plan and you can have all the details, and then throwing them something at 90 degrees, like you would not have expected Sapporo Arasaka to show up.
Right.
But doing that when you're, maybe your people are in the building trying to plant the thing, and the CEO shows up and is walking the halls because this is a thing that he does.
Yeah, this is something that Aaron and I were talking about a week or two ago with like heists and such, and sitting down at the table and planning them. Is you can plan it out meticulously and think you've got everything covered, and it takes forever, and some people are bored. But then you get 5 minutes into it and everything has gone wrong because you didn't see this one thing, or a failed roll happened or whatever. And so, like, both from a GM and a player standpoint, you don't need to plan every single little tiny detail, because something will always go wrong if you've planned it, even if you planned it out to the tiniest minute detail. Something's always going to go wrong. And that's where the drama happens.
Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I think as long as you're kind of there are certainly some beats that are familiar to people from movies and such, and I think that throwing the 90-degree angle can feel like you might be just trying to pull one over on the players, right? I could feel people being like, "What the like?" You want it to be a pleasant surprise,
Right?
I think you want it to feel like it's part of the scenario.
You want
not
it to
just
be,
like, "Ha ha ha! I win."
yeah. You like if like in the let's use Arasaka Tower with V and Jackie. You know, having having Saburo show up is like a curveball, but it's something that is like it made sense for the world.
Right.
Right.
You know, if it was a killer GM, you'd end up having what's his name, the Borg
Smasher, Adam Smasher.
Adam Smasher. You just have him just randomly show up in the elevator, and then everything goes wrong. You know, that's the killer GM. That's the not fun solution. Having the Saburo Arasaka show up and then see him be murdered in front of your face and go, oh crap, and then everything going wrong from there. And they didn't trip the alarm.
Right.
Saburo was found dead, and they locked down the building.
Right.
V and Jackie did that whole thing perfect.
Well, I think you're bringing up an important part here is doing the background on your world so that you have something logical that could happen. I don't know about you guys, but I got real into the lore of Cyberpunk 2077 and the whole what was actually going on with the relic. It's only little pieces like throughout the game, but when you put it all together, it's like, oh my God, there's this whole thing that no one ever references except slightly in these little places. But you have to know the story Bible, right? You know what I'm saying here?
Yeah. You have to. It has to feel like it would make sense, and even throwing things like Adam Smasher in there, I could see a campaign where just having him show up could lead everything to disaster. Not because like he starts attacking the players, but just because they can't resist the temptation to try and take him down.
Or they know he's nearby and freak out and then cause something to happen.
Yeah. So the last scenario we want to talk about is kind of like the longer arc one. Shows up in a couple of places, but a corporal operative wants to defect to a nonprofit, but they're constantly being watched by security officers. They'll be at a high-profile gala, and it's their only chance for extraction. You've got a month until the gala. Your team has a month until the gala to prepare. What do you do? Right? And so with the long game, you've got lots of options. This is also, I think, pretty good if we were talking at the beginning about what the capabilities of your group are. So, right, like Rocker Boy gets hired as entertainment. Just a no-brainer, right?
Yep.
Maybe supplemental security.
Bob would... What high-profile Zeta Tech gala wouldn't have media there?
Right.
You know, Bob would certainly show up to record the whole thing.
Right. The other, there is also the other ways to do it. Like, you could go hard. You could do, like, in some ways, Die Hard, right? Like, you hire goons to attack the party, and, like, you just do the hardcore extraction. But the goons are actually trying to, like, get the necklace, right? So there's, like, the bait and switch. You're there for the guy, but the goons are there just to make lots of noise. There's also the Mission Impossible thing. You can always, just completely fake it. You've got, like, the sculpted face so that you appear that you're someone else. Which we also saw in 2077.
A twist to the go in hard and hiring goons. Go and hire goons to infiltrate the building next door, so that the gala looks out onto that building and then they see a firefight. What group of spectators isn't going to look over and see the firefight or try and get the heck out? But you're not putting anyone at the gala in danger, so you don't end up with like giant corporate bounties. I don't know where that came from. But having basically some sort of external distraction that means everybody's eyes are over here while you're over in the other side.
So I think
all right, good stuff.
So two of our examples for that was Ocean's 12. Like they had to smuggle out a thing. Like Ocean's 12 just had like a whole bunch of different things going on. So the Ocean's movies in general, I think, are good for how to set up the infiltration and just ideas for like the target that you're going after. And Ocean's 12 actually I think is the one that also has the benefit of like they're up against a different thief, which is another way of introducing some like tension, right? Like there's another crew. Oh crap. And then I think for the exfiltration thing, I think Count Zero opened with this, if I'm remembering my Gibson right.
I think
like,
that's right.
Yes.
Like they have to. The guy he's in the corporate headquarters. He wants to get his daughter out, so that's like the initial setup for that particular book. And then there's a
Things go wrong.
road trip. Things go wrong.
Yes. Yep. All right. Well, thanks for attending our latest Minion and Future Overlord security training. Come over to layerofsecrets.com for supplementary materials. Ken has just put out actually a new post about security and such, I believe. Wasn't it
Doors and locks?
Doors and locks.
Yeah, doors and locks. That's what it was. So thanks for coming. If you are sitting near that old death ray still, good luck. Maybe visit the infirmary. Or better yet, head over to dice.camp and follow us at Layer of Secrets. And we can provide something for those Hyperion Gamma Birds. It's a cream. All right. Till next time.